I invite you to join me in the prayer of preparation. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Today we continue our series on Love to Stay. We are talking about marriage and relationships that are meant to last, but sometimes end far sooner than they otherwise could. We talked last week about the goal of loving relationships, and that is agape, a love that is selfless and wants the very best for another person. This kind of love isn't just about marriage either. It's about all the people we meet and our fundamental orientation towards them. Today we look at habits that can bring healing and wholeness to our relationships with others. There was a photo I saw once that showed an older couple sitting on a park bench. Above them was a caption with this conversation in it. The husband says, "Whenever I get mad, you never seem to get upset. How do you manage to control your temper so well?" She replies, "I just go and clean the toilet." The husband is a bit perplexed by this and says, "Wait, how does that help you?" And she answers back, "Easy. I clean it using your toothbrush." Conflict happens to everyone. Just last week I shared with you a sermon on agape love, and I have to be honest, I felt a bit awkward doing it. Emily and I both love each other very much, but sometimes we don't get along. Usually I'm too stubborn and Emily wants to argue a point, so we get mad at each other. It just happens. And what do you know, it's Saturday night, right before I start a new series on Love to Stay, and Emily and I are at home arguing with each other. It's hard to feel like you have something meaningful to say to people about love when you are in the midst of a fight with your spouse. But that's life. Conflicts are inevitable. Most of the time it's not that big of a deal. Emily and I are still happily married. So when we are healthy, we can work through these disagreements with people, whether it's a spouse, a friend, a neighbor, or a family member. But sometimes there are really big issues. These are the kinds of things that can permanently damage or even destroy a relationship. Last week someone came to me after church asking, "Are we going to talk about marriages again next week? Because I'm not sure I can handle it." So let me take just a moment here to assure you, I recognize that the people in our church come from a variety of situations. I know we have many people here who have gone through divorce themselves. Some have gone through what no one should ever have to go through. Some are single and like it, others single and left with aching hearts. The aim, of course, is not dragging up old wounds, but for us to learn how to avoid habits that hurt and instead practice habits that heal us. My hope is that the pain I've experienced in my own life can be useful in helping others to avoid a similar fate. I hope that's what you would want for others as well. So for those who are single or those who are wounded, the goal here is healing. And I hope you'll continue the journey with us as we explore how to have better relationships with the people with whom we interact. There's a large United Methodist church in Kansas, Church of the Resurrection, which surveyed 1,300 divorced people in their congregation to help church leaders understand what kinds of things were at work hurting marriages. There were the usual problems: poor communication, money problems, marrying too young, choosing separate paths. But there were three problems that were far and above the biggest threats to marriage. And I would dare say these translate easily into actions that damage all kinds of relationships, not just marital ones. So we're going to spend some time looking at these. We'll start with number 3. The third most frequent action that damaged relationships was emotional or physical abuse. Every 15 seconds in the United States, a woman is battered by her husband or boyfriend. Every day, 4 of these women will die. Sometimes men are on the receiving end of abuse, but by and large, physical abuse is perpetuated by men. This kind of abuse is crossing a line. I've heard many people use this phrase, God hates divorce. which drives me crazy because too often there is a cause behind the divorce, and ignoring something like domestic abuse seems so callous to me. You know what I think God hates more than divorce? When people physically hurt God's beloved creation. That kind of violence of two people with a close connection to one another seems to be the exact opposite of how we are called to live in relationship to one another. Sometimes the role of pastor involves counseling people who struggle with different forms of abuse. I've heard of pastors that tell abused spouses to remain in marriages where domestic violence occurs. Though I believe that good can still come of bad situations, I cannot fathom how anyone could tell someone else to return to their abuser. It seems unconscionable to me. Instead, God calls us to bless and build up one another. I've talked before about the golden rule where Jesus reminds us to do to others as you would have them do to you. Jesus reminds us not only to avoid doing harm to others, but to specifically go out of our way to do good to another person. When someone violates their end of the agreement, one does good and the other returns it with bad. The answer to me isn't to ignore it and keep doing good, but instead to do what you can to restore a positive relationship. If nothing works, I'm not sure you even have a genuine relationship with the other person. It signals serious brokenness on the part of the abuser, one that needs more than what many of us are equipped to give. These people need real, redemptive healing. Another kind of abuse isn't physical, but mental. Verbal abuse can leave a psychological scar. John Gottman, a retired professor of psychology at the University of Washington, says that people in great marriages fight now and then, some of them every day. But it's not how often couples fight, but how they fight that determines whether a marriage is great. He's famously claimed that within the first 5 minutes of meeting with a couple, he can discern with 91% accuracy whether they will ultimately divorce. He does it by setting up a question that's bound to cause conflict. Then he watches to see how they fight. If they express frustration, that's good. If they go on the attack, demeaning and abusing each other, that signals an impending shipwreck. The way we speak to each other is huge. That's what Paul was talking about in Ephesians 4 when he said, "Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up." The word for evil he used means to putrefy. It's the offensive odor and the disgusting sight of something as it decays. Paul is saying, hey, for those of you who suffer from halitosis, always speaking ill of others, keep your mouths closed. Whether you are the abuser or the one receiving it, you've got to be courageous and say, this is not right. Something has to change. I need help. The goal is to build others up, not tear them down. Do what it takes to bring life in every situation. The second most common cause for destroyed relationships is addiction. There are lots of forms this can take, such as drug abuse, gambling, and sex addiction, but perhaps one of the most classic examples also happens to be perfectly legal, and that's alcohol abuse. Addiction has its root in a very simple human reaction. When something pleasing happens to us, there are chemicals that are released in our brain. It feels good. So when we experience pleasure, this chemical, dopamine, is released into our brain. That's our body's built-in reward system. It keeps us eating food and reproducing. When Davy drives his mother crazy, for instance, dopamine is what makes a baby brother even remotely possible for him. Part of us might say, don't do it. but our emotions and behavior respond to this internal reward system. So addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol or whatever, acts to short-circuit our normal responses. We all desire the release of dopamine in our bodies, but addictions can release a huge surge of it. Because of a combination of our genetic makeup and environmental choices, it can be extremely difficult for some people to resist the addictive behavior. They want that surge, and they will take dangerous, relationship-damaging actions to get it. In the United Methodist Church, we've had a long-standing historic stance against alcoholism. Welch's grape juice was invented by a Methodist in New Jersey who wanted to provide an alternative to the wine given at communion. The mere smell of wine can send a person who battles alcohol addiction off the deep end. So that's why we always give grape juice when we celebrate communion. We do everything we can to stand with and support those who battle their addictions. Now, I know we have plenty of people that drink alcohol in our church. The point is not to make you feel bad that you might drink, but when consuming alcohol crosses that line from a nice, relaxing activity to fueling dangerous actions and damaging your relationships with others, I think you have some serious soul-searching to do. Many people will tell you, if you have a loved one who tells you, I think you have a drinking problem, you probably do. The Apostle Paul says, all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. Seeking short-term pleasure can lead to long-term pain and shame. So figuring out how to reject that which can enslave us is very important. Choosing actions that honor God, grow our self-discipline, and keep us accountable is the start of freedom from addiction. All that I've said today is secondary to the single most destructive force in marriages. In 150 countries across the world, the number one cause of divorce is infidelity. Adultery can be the result of marital problems, but it can also be the cause of them. Now, attraction to people is perfectly normal. We are drawn to people before we are married, and we are drawn to people after marriage. But how do we avoid a scenario that ends with us breaking a sacred covenant we made to our loved ones? The University of Chicago did a general social survey, and they found a correlation between regular attendance at worship and faithfulness in marriage. The numbers go like this. Of those who never attend worship services, 24.8% reported adultery. For those who attend less than monthly, the rate is 20.6%. For those who attend monthly or more, it is 17.1%. And for those attending weekly, it is 12.4%. So regular attendance in worship seems to cut the risk in half. If we want to affair-proof our marriages, attending worship together is a great place to start. The book of James says something that I think connects to how attraction can go haywire. It says, one is tempted by one's own desire, being lured and enticed by it. Then when that desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and that sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. We need to develop holy habits that lead to love and life, not poor habits that hurt. A scenario that can potentially trip people up is when someone might do or say something that seems just a bit too racy. If it's directed toward me, my immediate response is always the same. The first thing I do is go and tell my wife, Emily. So know that if you've ever said something that might be deemed inappropriate, my wife already knows. And I like that because then it's not a secret anymore, and the problem is no longer between me and that individual. Instead, it's a problem between that person and my wife. And Emily, she knows Taekwondo, so there you have it. There's another situation that has become the new haven for all kinds of relationship problems, and that's Facebook. Some studies were done recently that concluded Facebook is the place where most connections leading to infidelity take place. I'm certain that extends to problems in other kinds of relationships too, such as family and friends. For me, I grew up using a computer to make all kinds of connections with people, but one thing I have never been willing to do is to give anyone full access to that information. I have passwords for my email and computer that I have never shared with anyone, ever, not even my own wife. A holy habit I could use in my own life is to make myself fully accountable to her for the things I say and write, even the things in my past. She is downstairs today teaching our senior high Sunday school class, but I promise that if she wants it, I will give her those passwords. That's my vow today. I want to be accountable because I want my relationship with Emily to last. I don't want to get caught up in a situation that leads to a mistake that I cannot undo. I think the overriding message in all of this comes down to just one thing. No matter what kind of relationship we are talking about, friends, family, spouses, or the like, if you find yourself in trouble, unable to bring life and love to your relationships, you've got to get help. We've talked about a few things you can do to find help. One is rededicate yourself to God. Last week we gave out the Wesley Covenant prayer cards. Let that be your prayer as you recommit your life to God. A second is to reveal your struggle to others. Make yourself accountable to change, to be a better person and to build others up. Let me end today with this. A woman came to a lawyer and said, I want to get a divorce. I really hate my husband and I want to hurt him as much as I can. Give me some advice. Besides getting money and the family, she was wondering about what else she could do to him. The attorney said, look, you're going to get divorced to this guy anyway, so for 3 months, don't criticize him. Speak only well of him. Build him up. Every time he does something nice, commend him for it. Tell him what a great guy he is and do that for 3 full months. After he thinks that he has your confidence and love, hit him with the news and it'll hurt him all the more. The woman thought, I can't go wrong with this. I'm divorcing him anyways. I don't need to prove him wrong anymore. I think I'll go through with it. So she complimented her husband for everything he did. For 3 months, she told him what a great man he was. And you know what happened to that relationship? After the 3 months, they forgot about the divorce and they ended up going on their second honeymoon together. I hope I can be more like that woman when it comes to how I treat my wife. I want to build her up. I want to bring hope and healing into our relationship. I think it starts with a commitment to habits that help bring us closer together. So whatever relationship you find yourself in, turn conflicts into opportunities to do good, to grow closer to God and to each other. Do it with habits that heal. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. At this time, I invite you, let's stand and we're going to have a